The wind howled like a hungry wolf around the solitary cabin, a desolate sound swallowed by the vast, snow-laden wilderness. Elias rode low in his saddle, the cold biting through worn leather and canvas, finding purchase deep in his bones. He hadn't expected to find anything out here, just the lingering silence of winter and the ghosts of abandoned dreams. But smoke, thin and wavering against the gray sky, had drawn him, a thread of impossible life in a dead landscape. He dismounted stiffly, his movements economical, practiced. The cabin stood crooked, half buried in drifts, looking less like shelter and more like a tomb the earth was slowly reclaiming. He approached cautiously, hand near the worn grip of his revolver. The silence inside was thick, unnatural. He pushed the door inward. It groaned on frozen hinges, protesting the intrusion. Dust motes danced in the weak light filtering through grime-streaked windows. The air inside was warmer than the biting cold outside, smelling faintly of old smoke and something else, something small and fearful. His eyes, sharp and accustomed to searching barren horizons, scanned the single room. A crude table, 2 stools, a hearth where embers glowed weakly beneath a pile of ash, hinting at recent tending. No one in sight. Yet, a threadbare blanket was pulled taut over something small huddled beneath the low bunk against the far wall. A primal instinct, honed by years of solitary survival and a deep-seated aversion to unnecessary harm, stayed his hand. He moved closer, slowly, deliberately. The bundle trembled. He knelt, quiet as the falling snow outside. He saw a tangle of dark, matted hair, a thin shoulder hunched tight. "Hey!" he murmured, his voice a low rumble that seemed to swallow the vastness of the cabin. The form flinched violently, a small, panicked gasp escaping. He pulled the blanket back gently, revealing a girl no older than 10, maybe 11. Her face was smudged with dirt, eyes wide with terror like a cornered rabbit, sunken and shadowed with exhaustion and hunger. Her clothes were rags, insufficient for the season. She was a ghost of a child, clinging to life by a thread. Her fear was a palpable thing, filling the small space, echoing the raw desperation he'd seen in other vulnerable creatures left to the mercy of the world. He saw not just fear, but a profound, bone-deep weariness, the kind that settled when hope had long since fled. She didn't cry out, didn't scream. She just looked at him, her small body rigid with the expectation of pain or abandonment. The stakes were stark. Leave her here, she would die. Take her where? And who was she? Why was she alone in this forgotten place? The harsh reality of the world outside the cabin pressed into this was no place for a child, and the kind of people who left one here were not people one wanted to attract. He felt a complex weight settle in his chest, part grim responsibility, part reluctant curiosity. He looked at her, truly looked, past the fear and the dirt, and saw a spark, faint but persistent, the stubborn will to endure despite everything. The storm outside intensified, the wind a mournful cry. He knew, with a certainty that bypassed thought, that he wasn't leaving. He didn't press her for answers. Not yet. He simply moved about the small cabin, his presence a heavy silence punctuated by the practical sounds of survival. He found a meager store of firewood, added logs to the dying embers, coaxing the flame back to life. The small girl watched him from beneath the bunk, her eyes tracking his every move, distrust etched into her pinched features. He didn't look directly at her, didn't make sudden gestures. He found a dented pot, melted snow from a bucket near the door, and heated it over the fire. From his own meager supplies, he took out a strip of dry jerky and crumbled it into the hot water, adding a pinch of ground cornmeal. It wasn't much, a thin gruel, but it was warm. He placed the pot on the hearth, then retreated to the opposite side of the room, sitting with his back against the cold wall, watching the fire. He unsaddled his horse outside, gave it a measure of feed he carried, and returned, stamping snow from his boots. Still, he kept his distance from the bunk. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken questions and shared vulnerability. He could feel the weight of her gaze, measuring him, searching for threat. Her internal world, he imagined, must be a landscape of shadows and fear, a place where trust had been a luxury she could no longer afford. He saw the way her small hands, chapped and raw, trembled as she finally, slowly, crept out from under the bunk. She moved with the hesitant caution of a wild animal, her eyes never leaving him. She reached the pot, kneeling by the hearth, small shoulders still hunched. She didn't look at him as she ate, swallowing quickly, almost frantically, as if afraid the meager meal would be snatched away. The sound of her quiet consumption was the only break in the cabin's stillness. He noted the way she guarded her movements, the lack of childhood carelessness. Whoever she was, whatever she had seen, it had forced a premature, terrible maturity upon her. He saw a tattered piece of fabric clutched in one small hand beneath her clothes. A doll? Maybe, or a keepsake. He didn't ask. He spent the rest of the day performing simple tasks, mending a loose hinge on the door, reinforcing a drafty window with salvaged cloth, sharpening his knife. Each action was deliberate, predictable, meant to convey a lack of hostile intent without words. By nightfall, the cabin was warmer, the fire casting dancing shadows that softened the harsh reality of their shared space. He ate his own supper cold, watching her. She curled up again beneath the blanket, but this time, she didn't retreat entirely under the bunk. A small face remained visible, eyes still open, still watching him in the firelight. The trust was a fragile seedling, barely pushing through frozen ground, but it was there. Days blurred into a quiet routine. Elias would leave to hunt or check his trap lines, returning with small game or whatever sustenance the harsh land grudgingly offered. The girl, Alara, as he learned her name in a hesitant whisper one evening, began to move more freely when he was present, though she remained wary. Her fear hadn't vanished, but it had receded, replaced by a cautious observation and a dawning, fragile acceptance. She spoke little, her voice a soft murmur easily lost in the wind's song. When she did speak, it was about simple things, the cold, the fire, the taste of stewed rabbit. Never about the past. But pieces of the truth, the story she carried, began to surface in other ways. He noticed the specific, sharp terror that seized her at the sound of approaching horses, forcing her to instinctively dive back under the bunk. He saw the way her gaze would fix on the horizon with an adult anxiety, far too heavy for her young eyes. He found, tucked beneath her straw mattress, a child's crudely drawn picture. 2 stick figures, one large, one small, holding hands, with a third, larger figure looming in the background, faceless and menacing. One evening, while cleaning his rifle, she finally spoke of it, her voice barely audible. They said I was a mistake. A burden. She looked at the drawing. He took me here, said it was best, said they wouldn't look in a place like this. That they remained a mystery, a source of palpable dread that clung to her like the scent of wood smoke. It became clear she wasn't merely abandoned. She had been hidden, left to disappear. The shocking truth wasn't a secret crime she had committed, but a crime committed against her, cast off by those who should have protected her, left to the mercy of the elements by a figure implied to be a parent or guardian, to avoid some perceived shame or consequence. The sheer, brutal casualness of it, the cold calculation of leaving a child to die alone, was a stark horror in the quiet cabin. It ignited something cold and hard in Elias, a quiet resolve that settled deep within him. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about justice, however small and personal. Then the inevitable happened. A rider, then 2, appeared on the distant horizon, dark shapes against the snow. Alara saw them first, a small sound of pure terror escaping her lips as she scrambled under the bunk, her body trembling violently. The riders approached the cabin, drawn by the faint trail Elias's horse had left, or perhaps by the same wisp of smoke that had guided him. They were rough men, weathered and hard-faced, the kind who asked questions with their hands and saw weakness as an invitation. Elias stood by the hearth, rifle held casually but ready. The air in the cabin crackled with tension, the fragile peace shattered. This was the threat she had feared, coming to reclaim their mistake, or perhaps simply to prey upon whoever they found here. The quiet sanctuary was about to become a battleground. The confrontation was brief, brutal, and definitive. Elias didn't speak much. He rarely did. His actions spoke for him. The men, surprised by the occupant of the cabin, underestimated him, saw a lone figure and an easy mark. They did not see the quiet strength honed by years of solitude and necessary violence. The first moved too quickly, the second hesitated. The cabin was small, confined the struggle. The sounds of the fight were raw, sharp, a grunt, a thud, the scrape of a boot, the final choked gasp. Alara remained hidden, silent, but Elias knew she heard it all. He felt her fear keenly, a cold dread that warred with his own grim focus. When it was over, the silence returned, heavier now, carrying the weight of what had transpired. Elias stood, breathing deeply, surveying the scene. He cleaned up swiftly, efficiently, erasing the evidence of the intrusion. The harsh world demanded such things. He didn't look at Alara until he was finished. He knelt by the bunk again, the faint smell of powder and blood clinging to the air. He saw her small face, pale and tear-streaked, peeking out. Her eyes were wide, not just with fear now, but with a dawning comprehension of what he had done, of what his presence meant. He offered no explanation, no justification, simply was. In the days that followed, a different kind of silence settled over the cabin, one of quiet understanding. The external threat had been neutralized, but the internal landscape had shifted. Alara emerged from beneath the bunk not just physically, but emotionally. She was still quiet, still carried the shadows of her past, but the paralyzing fear had lessened its grip. She watched Elias with new eyes, seeing not just a provider of food and warmth, but a protector, an unexpected anchor in her storm-tossed world. Her small acts of trust increased, helping tend the fire, sharing a small, uneven smile, her gaze meeting his without flinching. Her transformation was quiet but profound. The child who had been reduced to hiding, convinced she was a burden and a mistake, began to stand a little taller. Resilience wasn't a sudden burst of strength, but a slow, steady unfolding, nurtured by the simple act of being seen and protected. Elias's stoic presence hadn't saved her in a conventional sense. He had merely provided the space and the safety for her own tenacious spirit to reassert itself. He had uncovered the shocking truth of her abandonment. Yes, but the truly astonishing revelation was the indomitable flicker of life that had survived such deliberate cruelty. Standing at the cabin door, watching the first tentative signs of spring soften the harsh landscape, Alara no longer looked like a child waiting to disappear. She looked like a survivor, small but resolute. Their connection was unspoken, forged in shared hardship and the grim necessity of the wilderness. There were no promises of forever, no grand plans. The future remained uncertain, stretching like the vast, unknown territory outside the cabin walls. But as they prepared to leave the forgotten cabin, heading towards wherever the trail might lead them next, there was a quiet dignity about them, a subtle shift from vulnerability to strength. The world was still a hard place, full of unseen dangers, but they faced it together, not out of obligation, but out of a quiet, earned partnership. In a forgotten corner of the world, amidst the snow and the silence, two solitary figures had found an unexpected, resilient form of hope.